So we've got a situation now where there's a lot of researchers at unis and other institutions who are campaigning to end what they describe as the draconian lockdown. And the other thing that's happened in Victoria, remember that there's a massive mental health issue here. Massive. Because you've got 330,000 people in Melbourne who are going to be out of work, which is just for one state. Unbelievable. Now, there's a think tank, there are many of those, but this one is the Institute of Public Affairs. And they are making the point that the powers of the state that are enabled during this lockdown are extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. To explain how so, Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs, Gideon Rozner. Gideon, give us an idea of how, under normal circumstances, most of what the police and others, and even Army, are allowed to do would need, you'd need a magistrate or judge's warrant to be able to do most of this.
Well, that's right, Leon, and thank you so much for having me on. You're right. Under normal circumstances, for example, if the police wanted to enter your home, they would need a warrant or at least some reasonable suspicion that a crime was being committed. Under this legislation, a police officer can enter your home at any time without a warrant to make sure that you're complying with lockdown and curfew measures, among others. But that's just one example of the extraordinary way in which the most basic legal rights that we've come to understand them in Western democracies have been suspended. Any law in Victoria, for example, can be basically cancelled out or suspended by the police minister at any time. They can direct any government agency to do whatever the police minister tells them to do. They can seize private property for any reason. And worst of all, one of the most basic rights, which is the freedom of movement, the freedom to leave our own homes after 8 p.m. has been suspended here in Victoria. 5 million people are under a curfew. I never thought I would see anything like this on Australian soil, and that's the way a lot of other Victorians are feeling.
Now, you and many others from various, not only think tanks, but unis and other institutions and businesses, what are you calling on the government to do?
Well, look, I think whatever the government does needs to be proportionate, and it needs to be proportionate to the danger involved. Now, I understand that you're going to have, I think it's Peter Doherty, is it, on after me talking about...
Professor Peter Collingham, and I know...
Oh, Collingham brothers, I do apologise. And being an epidemiologist and being a medical professional, I'm sure he will talk about the need to get infection numbers down and the fact that the coronavirus is a serious illness that can do terrible health damage. That's absolutely true, but it needs to be balanced against other considerations. Health and keeping coronavirus numbers down is a legitimate objective to government, but I don't think that should come at the cost of fundamental legal rights. And this isn't just abstract arguments either, Leon. We've seen police overreach in the last lockdown and increasingly this one. We've seen families that have been fined for example, taking their children for driving lessons, even though that poses no threat to anybody's safety. We've seen residents of housing towers locked up and not being able to be permitted to leave their own building, subsisting on army rations. And worst of all, we've seen thousands of people, 300,000 people whose livelihoods will be snuffed out. 300,000 people who might have trouble paying the mortgage, paying the rent, feeding their family, and will lose potentially a business or a job that they have spent years creating. I think we need to have we don't elect politicians to just take point-blank advice from any government official or any expert. We elect politicians to weigh up a range of considerations and do what is the best for everyone. And right now, I don't think the Andrews government has the balance right.
So you're saying it's just that what they're doing is disproportionate to the issue. Is that your argument?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I've been a sceptic of lockdowns basically from the beginning. I think that they went too far in the first instance. But even I will concede there are some things that do need to be limited in the face of coronavirus. I think it's reasonable, for example, to keep international borders closed. I think it's reasonable to limit mass gatherings, and sadly that means football games. But it also means protests, Leon. we had a Black Lives Matter protest go ahead in the centre of Melbourne with 10,000 people. So not only are we seeing the government give itself extraordinary powers, but we are seeing that these powers are being applied extremely selectively. A protest was organised for, anti-lockdown people. Some of their ideas were a bit strange, admittedly, but there was a so-called Freedom March that was slated to go ahead in Melbourne last weekend. And the police descended on Melbourne to arrest absolutely anybody that seemed to have anything to do with it, as opposed to the Black Lives Matter protest, which, is thought to have contributed in some ways to the recent outbreaks we're seeing. So not only are we seeing extremely heavy-handed, undemocratic laws, which have been passed with no democratic mandate, by the way. Parliament isn't even sitting. Not only are we seeing these laws, but we are seeing the police and the government effectively adjudicating which protests and which form of political speech can go ahead and which cannot. This has no place in a liberal democracy like Australia.
All right, Gideon, thank you for joining us. Now, that's Gideon Rozner from the Institute of Public Affairs.
You said that the pandemic is disappearing, but we lost 6,000 Americans this week. And just in this room, you have dozens of people. You're not following the guidelines in New Jersey, which say you should not have more than 25.
No, they don't have. It's a political activity.
Why are you saying such a bad example, Mr. President?
You're wrong on that because it's a political activity. They have exceptions, political activity, and it's also a peaceful protest. So when you have, and as you know, they asked if they could be, a number of, and to me they look like they all have, pretty much all have masks on, but, you have an exclusion in the law. It says peaceful protest or political activity, right? In fact, specifically, it says exactly political activity or peaceful protest. And you could call it political activity, but I'd call it peaceful protest because they heard you were coming up, and they know the news is fake. They understand it better than anybody. And they asked whether or not...
Agenda 21 is coming soon.
If the press in this country were honest, it wasn't corrupt, if it wasn't fake, our country would be so much further ahead. But we're doing really great. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
At the beginning of the 21st century, the Umbrella Corporation had become the largest commercial entity in the United States. 9 out of every 10 homes contain its products. Its political and financial influence is felt everywhere. In public, it is the world's leading supplier of computer technology, medical products, and healthcare. Unknown even to its own employees, its massive profits are generated by military technology, genetic experimentation, and viral weaponry.
You're all going to die down here.